We were talking about that a few minutes ago in 2008. Really mostly for my own benefit, although I occasionally taught here and there and used it in a variety of settings, but mostly when I started doing wider church work, I let it go. I mean, I kept my own practice, but I wasn't teaching very much, other than here and there when I was at a conference like this and people were like, oh, you teach yoga? Can you do the 7 a.m. yoga class? But I would get that every once in a while, but generally I wasn't teaching a whole lot. And then I was in an experience, my hometown is Columbus, Ohio now. It's not where I'm from, but where I live now for the last 7 years. And I had this revelation. I was working in the conference at that time in a time of really big conflict and really big change that was, of course, inciting conflict. And I was really frustrated. I bet you've never had these moments. I had this moment of going to my regular yoga class, and the energy I was carrying in there was, I should just quit, I'm done, I'm gonna go teach yoga. That was where my mind and body was that day. Wasn't my best space, but that's where I was at, and that's okay. I don't remember much of what happened in that class. Actually, I don't remember anything of what happened in that class. What I do remember is that when I came out, the message to me was, maybe it's not either or, it's both and. And those messages of both and I've learned in my life, I don't know about you, are really, really important. Now, I didn't know what that meant exactly, but what I did was that I went to our board chair and I said, we have some really tough board meetings come up. Can I do some community building, some meditation and mindfulness, thinking she would say no. And I was cool with her saying no. Like, I was not like insecure about that. I was like, if she says no, fine, it's all right. And she emailed me back about 20 seconds later and said, yes, we should do that. And that was my first sort of toe, like little baby toe, into combining these things. And since then, I've done an advanced yoga teacher training. Since then, I've worked on blending my passion, my equal passions for leadership and organizational development with meditation, mindfulness, and yoga, because I think these things can help each other. I think these things help. And particularly as we talk about tackling tough conversations. And I bet none of you have had any of those in the last 2 years at all, right? No, we haven't had to have any hard conversations at all in the last 2 years. I mean, we always have to have these conversations. We've really had to have them in the last couple of years. And I would say that part of what brings me to this topic is about 10% personality and about 90% practice. So I'm kind of the ilk that I'm a little more willing to do hard conversations than most people, like by that much, maybe this much more. But 90% of it is practice. Both by just doing the hard conversations and figuring out how to do them better, and reading from people, learning from people who do them better, but also through my meditation and mindfulness practice. That supports me as much or more than anything else, or whatever your practice is. It doesn't have to be the exact practice I have, but what are the practices that we have that support us, keep us grounded and centered enough to do that hard work, to do the hard work. Because if we're scattered, if we're frustrated, if we're angry, if we're like all over the place, we're not gonna be able to do it well, right? And there's never really a doing it well. You're always fumbling yourself way through something, through hard conversations in some way. So we're gonna work through this. I don't have all the magic answers, I wish I did, but we're gonna go through some of the things I've learned, some of the things I've studied, and we're going to practice a little bit together. And we're gonna do that in a couple of ways. I'm gonna talk actually a big chunk of our time of how do you build the foundation in your team for being able to have hard conversations. Because they don't happen magically. You have to have a foundation and a culture in your organization to be able to do that. You have to have relationships with individuals and between the individuals on your team to do that. So they can't just happen magically. Sometimes they do, but mostly not. And then finally, how do you individually prepare to have those? We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And again, I have some answers, but not all. You all have done this, possibly more than I have. So I love to hear from you, hear your questions, your perspectives, what you bring to the table. So we're going to prepare and work on that for tough conversations. So as we get started here, I always like to hear from you. So you've heard my spiel, who I am, what I'm planning on doing today. What would make this session really successful for you? because I have a plan. I have an outline, I have slides, I have all the stuff, but like, what do you need? Is there something that would really make this successful for y'all? What would be helpful today? Or what were you hoping to get out of this? And I can veer, yes?
Yeah, so if I could take back maybe the top 2 or 3 things that I could do better and then share with my team, teach the leaders.
Okay.
To do better. I'm sure you've got that, so.
Yep.
Yeah, so not that it's easy, but what might be the top 2?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also, related to that, hope that I'm giving you at least 2 or 3 things that can go back and help build foundationally how you can have that more often, right? Or be ready for it when it needs to happen. Yeah?
So beyond just like strategies, I would like to have a better understanding of being comfortable. You know, so I know that that's part of the planning that you're going to touch on, but even with the best laid out plans and strategies, it's still difficult, you know, as you are approaching those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Anything else that would make this wildly successful or what you're hoping to get? And that's fine if there's nothing else. I just always like to check in, check the pulse. Check the pulse of the room. If you think of something else, here's the other thing. I used to work with at-risk kids. Like I used to work with teenagers in all kinds of settings, so interrupting me, it does not bother me, just so you know. It's really hard to throw me off. So, and if you do, I'll get back on track, it's fine. So feel free to raise your hand at any time, interact. Your grown-ups, come and go. If you need to use the restroom or whatever you need to do, we're all grown-ups here, so no worries about that. So, one of the things I like to start with, and this might be actually a hint at the second thing about being comfortable, is actually getting in touch and being comfortable in yourself. So I already told you that I'm a meditation and mindfulness teacher, and you can't come to this without doing a little of that. So, do you? Here's the thing about the way I approach meditation and mindfulness, is that you need to do this practice in the way that's comfortable for you, or as comfortable as you can make it. I'm a guide, I'm going to give you some direction, but if it's just whatever I'm saying isn't working for you, do whatever you need to do. So that's our deal, okay? And if you're one of those people that's like, I can't meditate, I can't focus, that's okay, no one else can too. Like if people told you you can, it's a lie. So it's just not true. But if you want to talk more about why that's a lie, I'll tell you more later, but not today, that's not the topic. So let's make a comfortable seat, a comfortable intentional seat. Why don't we say it that way? You might want to bring your hips a little bit out from the back of the chair. You might want, again, this is comfortable as your body, it works for your body too. Maybe your feet flat on the floor if that works, it may not. Resting your hands in your lap, they can even be palms up or palms down. The energy of that would be different, just make that comfortable. You might want to draw your shoulder blades a little bit more onto your back. You might want to make sure that your head is setting up toward the ceiling. The top of your head is pointing toward the ceiling. Your chin slightly tucked back, just slightly. Allowing the natural curves of the spine. And feel yourself settle in. Simply begin to notice the feeling of your body against the points of contact in the chair beneath you. You might feel the pressure of your feet, the feet and the floor rising up to meet the soles of your feet. The pressure of your feet in the shoes or socks that you have on, you feel that touch on the skin. Feel the pressure of the backs of your legs, maybe your upper or lower back against the chair. Your hands resting in your lap. Hear other, or sense into other things. You're going to hear the sounds around us, the sounds from the other rooms, the movement of people in the hallway. Simply allowing that to be without judgment. You might notice the play of light behind your eyelids. You may notice some physical sensation in your body that's coming up in this moment. That might be tension you didn't notice before, it might be relaxation, it might be just any sensation that might be coming up. And feel free to go to that sensation if that's what is inviting your attention. Feeling into, sensing into it without judgment. Perhaps even open with curiosity about what that sensation is about. Then feeling free to stay with any of these sensations if that's what's really inviting attention right now. Or if you'd like to follow the sound of my voice. Begin to feel into and sense into the rhythm of your breath, to the body being breathed. You may notice the physical sensations of the breath, the expanding of the torso with each inhale, the slight condensing of the torso with each exhale. You'll likely notice the movement of the belly, the chest, the rib cage, the back. The up and down movement of the diaphragm as it opens the lungs and then pushes the air out. You may notice the touch of air in the nostrils. Cooler on the way in, warmer on the way out. Simply noticing and sensing into the breath and its natural rhythm. Perhaps noticing any shifts or changes that may have occurred in the breath as you observe it. Simply noticing anything at all. drinking in these last few moments of quiet, of time with yourself and your breath. And allowing your breath to return to its natural rhythm. And then preparing yourself to return to our room and to this waking space that we're occupying. But you don't need to rush, we have plenty of time. Maybe start by just moving even a finger or a toe. Kind of getting back into the body, into movement a little bit. Maybe rolling the shoulders a little. Maybe there's a bigger movement your body is calling for, maybe a little bit of a stretch. Anything that feels right. And then eventually you might try just fluttering the eyes open and closed a little bit to start. Get your eyes acclimated to the light in the room. And eventually returning, opening the eyes. Again, there's no rush. I built in plenty of time for all the things, I promise. And return back to the space that we're in. Welcome back. Hope that was a grounding experience, or if it was unsettling, we can talk about that too. Again, I'm available to talk about that later once we've gotten through the other content. I've tried to leave time for questions at the end. So there's going to be a few things, some key concepts that I'm going to offer you today. And things that I think help us build this foundation for being on teams that can regularly have hard conversation, that can offer each other guidance and feedback without so much. Like, I don't think you ever avoid the discomfort entirely, but can you get more accustomed to the discomfort is maybe another way to think of that. So we have a sense of purpose. If we all have a shared and clear sense of purpose, I think that is one of the things that helps us. We have a sense of connection, and we constantly are fostering connection with each other and between each other on our teams. That we create a space for community care, that we care about each other beyond the work that we're doing. We care about each other as humans, that we create space for that. And we create this kind of space that we need for each person to do the kind of care for themselves, for them to maintain work-life balance, for them to have time with family, for them to do those things. Those are all sort of wrapped up in my notion of community care. I used to use the word self-care here, but I want something a little more expansive than that. That's why I've chosen those words. And I didn't make that up, I read that phrase somewhere, and I'm like, that's a good idea, and I used it. And then capacity building, that we're always building capacity within our team, not just for the skills they need to do their job, although that's important too. We're always investing in their leadership. These, and I hate this word, but the soft skills, people use that phrase. But those skills that people need that are actually really important skills, like these kind of skills that add up to being good at having hard conversations. And then an awareness and honesty about power dynamics in the conversation that you're having. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And all of these are things that are constantly unraveling, right, or constantly working on. So let's talk first about purpose. So purpose is knowing why you're doing what you're doing. If I had more time, there's a really awesome, you might have read the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, or you've seen his TED Talk. If you haven't, Google it. It's actually an old TED Talk, and the video's not very good, but it's a really good content, and his book is really good too. He talks about starting with your why. And the way I think of this in terms of my yoga and meditation practice, if any of you have done one of those kinds of classes, is they'll invite you to start with an intention, right? That's something that one of those classes might ask you to start with. What is your intention? So knowing why you as a team exists, or you as an organization exists, is important in this. Knowing that, because then you can align your behaviors. You can align even how you're having conversations or why you're having conversations with that broader vision and mission. Now, we're not a workshop about vision and mission. We could do that too, but we're not going to do that today. But knowing your purpose, knowing your why, because it can help influence the day-to-day interactions better. And not just in terms of the work that we do, That's important, but also in terms of how we do that. So one of the things that I think can help flow out of a clear sense of why, a clear sense of vision and mission, are having group guidelines or group guidance. What are the behaviors that you expect your team to have that relate back to that broader vision and mission, and maybe values if you have value statements? So what are the things? So here, I'm giving you an example. These are the things I do that I actually give these out when I teach, not necessarily my every yoga class that I teach, which it would take too long, but every time I'm doing a training and things like that, these are the guidelines that I offer up for the group so that we're doing, so that we're living into the values that I try to live. And again, these will grow and change over time. And this is something that you can create with your team, or what are the group guidelines that you have for how we behave. This is one of the things I always offer. Be fully present and extend and presume welcome to other people. So that's one of the things I lift up and hope that we do here today. Hope that you've been experiencing that already. That we listen generously and suspend judgment about another's story. So we listen rather than judge, and hold stories with care and respect. So that's one of the expectations I have for this room, and one of the things I usually I try to do with my groups, and the trainings I do and things like that. And then confidentiality. Now that may not apply to every situation, but I think most of the time we want to, at least with certain parts of our team meetings and things, maintaining confidentiality. Hold everything you hear in this room. And we can hold this in the room. What happens here in Louisville stays in Louisville. We can agree to that, right? Because you all are colleagues, right? And you might be sharing some things that are, that are a little bit different, or a little bit things that you don't want getting around back to your team or whatever. And author your own story and share your own gifts. Use I statements. So you speak for yourself, not for a group. If your mind, this is one that transformed me. If your mind turns to judgment, which it will because we're people, instead make a question. Turn to wonder. This is a really good practice. These are all kind of really good things for tackling tough conversations in general, but these are how I live my values. So this transformed me. So I don't know about you, but like you can have a conversation, someone's telling you about something, and you're like, if you would just do X, Y, Z, or you're driving me crazy, whatever that thing is, like it just does, it happens, right? Like instead of judging that as something, ask a question about it. Because I know that when I've actually paused and done that, now, I may not agree with the person sitting next to me or telling me the story or whatever, but I understand them better. I have more empathy for them if I've asked the question. And I may even lead to many more questions and conversation too.
Can you make this available through PowerPoint that we can?
Yeah, I'll get to that later, but I can email this to you later. Yeah, but I'll get to that later. Share the air, be mindful of how much you're speaking. So this important here, so let's be mindful of how much we're using time, because there's a lot of us in this room, and I want everybody to have a chance to speak, ask questions, share, that sort of thing. And then practice hospitality and inclusion, especially where diverse cultures meet. Believe that it's possible to emerge from our time together refreshed. Believe that that's possible, surprised, less burdened even than when we came. Because I can sort of feel a little heaviness like we're talking about hard conversations, right? And then welcome discomfort and love the questions. So this, especially because we're going to talk a little bit more about discomfort, welcome discomfort. It's not an enemy. So it's clear about purpose. So I always share these values or these purpose, like these guidelines for people's behavior at the beginning of trainings that I do, and invite people into that kind of space, and that these are what, not only that we're trying to live into, but if someone's not doing that, then that gives us grounds for holding them accountable. Because if you're just saying, if you ask a group to make, I used to do this with youth groups all the time. Here, we're gonna make our group guidelines for the weekend or whatever. Like you would say that, they almost always started with like, be respectful. Well, here's the reality. What being respectful to me is probably, it may not be what you think that is. So it's really important to name behaviors, I think, in that. Name the behavior that you want to see. And then if people aren't seeing that and people behaving outside of it, you can sit down with Johnny or whoever and say, listen, like this is what we're covenanting to do. Tell me about why. It doesn't feel like you're living into that right now. Maybe tell me a little bit about why that's happening for you. You might be able to have that conversation with them. And then being connected. So relationship building is so key to this. Being in relationship, knowing each other beyond the work that you do. Although the work you do together bonds you to greater or lesser degrees, right? But it also, we need to know each other as humans. And I know that flies in the face of what people say, like that we get fed this notion that when you become a professional, you need to act professionally. And somehow that means checking everything else about you on the door, which is ludicrous. Like, we're whole people. Like, that's not a thing. We can't, we're people, and we bring the stuff. You know, if it's stuff that's happening in our personal lives or whatever, like that stuff comes with us. And that's a piece of just being human and of being together on a team. So I invite you to really think hard about building this foundation and being in relationship with people when you're not stressed. And maybe you're stressed, but like all the time being in relationship with folks. And I'm going to give you some examples of how to do that. One of the things I can send you in an email also, I have a longer list of team building activities, some of which I've learned more recently, some of which are drawn all the way from when I used to do youth work, like drawing that kind of thing together. If you already do these kinds of things, you may know how to do other things that I don't know. But I'm only listing a few of them. My sheet that I have has a lot more. So, like I just referenced, develop team guidelines. If you don't have those already, that's something to develop as a team. Really talking out what are the behaviors that you're expecting on your team. And again, that gives you grounds for accountability, but it also just tells people what to do. Sometimes they just don't know that the behavior they're exhibiting is affecting people in the way that it is. Create team rituals. So that may be to celebrate particular successes. You might have a particular ritual around that. You might have particular ways to begin and end your team meetings. There may be particular days or of the week or month or year that you have particular gatherings, celebrations, right? It's not unlike what we do in families, but know why you're doing those. Like, be really clear about the why of why you're doing those gatherings and how does it serve making connections, how does it serve your broader vision and mission. So creating team rituals. Walking introductions or speed networking, and I'm going to let us practice that a little bit today. So I'll show you how to do walking introductions. Speed networking, if you did the online version of this gathering last year, was sort of like that. Like, you can set it up in a room, actually. And like give people, like, introduce yourselves in 2 minutes and like keep people moving through the whole room until they've talked to everyone. You can do that. It's super duper extroverted. Like, I totally get that, so I'm sorry to the introverts about that. I'm going to do walking introductions in a couple of minutes so that you get a feel. We won't do a whole lot of that, but get a feel for that. You can do parallel work. So if you have teams that are working remotely, like this has been a big challenge, and I've heard a lot of people talk to me about this, and I've helped some teams work through this. In some of my coaching and training work, but to do parallel work. So what that means so if you're in an office still, like, you kind of do this all the time, right? Your offices are next to each other, or maybe you have cubicles, or maybe you even have an open workspace. So people are always parallel working. So I'm at my desk doing my thing on the phone or whatever, and someone's next to me and you're always kind of working together, and you can always sort of like shout or look at each other. The challenge in remote settings, which we're going to more and more, right? Like, is that we don't get that same benefit of that casual interaction. Somebody told me that they did this and I thought it was brilliant, and I've actually done it with some folks. Like, set up time to do parallel work sessions or co-working sessions on Zoom or whatever platform you're using. And that seems really weird, but like, working together somehow motivates you. It's some mystery of the universe that I don't quite understand, quite frankly, but like going and working together, it's actually, and you can make it okay, like every so many minutes, maybe we take a break and even give people the opportunity to chat with each other. So doing parallel work, and that can be with one other person, with a group of people, remotely, or again, doing it intentionally even in person if you're working in person. You might have a question of the day or a prompt of the day. That can be something you do either online or in person. So it can be just a team, like some general question, like, you know, what is your favorite color is a lame question, but like, you know, but it could be still fun. Like, what are your favorite questions? What are your favorite colors? You can ask something about like, what TV show are you binging right now? What, like just simple stuff that helps people get to know each other. You can put that on like in a chat if you have some sort of group like on Teams or some other group chat thing, or Slack, whatever you use. Or you can put that up on a bulletin board or somewhere in a hallway if you're in person. And again, you may not know exactly who put that. In the case of a bulletin board, you wouldn't know necessarily who wrote something down, but you are sort of getting to know each other in a different way by using that. So that's another idea. And then you might do a brainstorming session or using a how might we question, which is one of my favorite things to do. So if you're tackling a problem on your team, you might form a how might we. So instead of focusing in on the problem, which we often do a how might we question. How might we do X, Y, Z, overcoming this problem? Or how might we create this new product, program, whatever we're trying to do? And do a very open brainstorming session. Like give everybody Post-it notes, one idea per Post-it note, there's no judgment, and then you look at all of there will be an abundance of responses. That's another, it's a job thing, like it actually gets you to completing a task, but it also helps build team and makes people feel really equal, like that they all have equal footing. I love doing that. So as promised, we're going to practice one of these for a couple of minutes. And I said we're going to do, if you're comfortable, doing walking introductions. And so what I'm going to invite you to do, if you're comfortable, if you don't want to, stay in your seat, that's totally fine, no judgment. Just stand up for a moment. And you don't have to move very fast. And I know these chairs are kind of awkward and in the way, but as best you can, moving between the aisles and in the back of the room where there's a little bit of an open space, simply begin to walk. Just walk, don't run into each other. I'm not going to tell you to close your eyes because you'll hit each other. But you can kind of look down. You don't necessarily have to be hardcore interacting right now. Just start moving. You might tune into your breath again if you're thinking, ooh, this is weird and uncomfortable. You might do that little breathing thing if that's calming to you.
Why am I going against the grain?
Just moving around a little bit. And then begin to maybe lift your eyes and notice the people who are passing you. Maybe acknowledging them, saying hello. And then eventually, finding someone, preferably someone that like you didn't come here with. Like if you're with someone at this, finding someone that you don't know or don't know well, and partnering up. If there's I didn't count the number of people, so if there's an odd number, like find a 3. A group of 3 is okay. Find another person and pause. So pause. And answer the question, say hi and say who you are and all that normal get to know you stuff. And then answer the question, what are you giving up to be here these few days? What are you giving up? And I'll give you a couple minutes to do that.
I'm fun to get from Wisconsin with the Ryan one thing I get about this is it's really one part of my life. And so I train with my trainer, personal trainer, 4 days a week. And so giving that up here, it just feels kind of odd. I mean, I don't have a gym here, but we have stuff starting right away in the morning. I want to get up early, and so it's like giving that up, which that's kind of like my self-care. It's like my time. No, I'm from Wisconsin. Oh, wow. Yeah. So it's like my self-care. It's like giving up my self-care time. Yes. Yes, I know, especially in Wisconsin, our weather is No. I guess
Then if you haven't switched people, if another person needs to talk, switch. It sounds like you're being good and organic about that. Yeah. Take another minute or so with this particular pairing.
So we have I did it, it was like a year-long thing. We had to research all the time that we were together. We graduated.
Begin to wrap up this conversation and then say goodbye and thank you to your new friend who you just met. And begin to walk again. Do that slow, gentle walk through the room. Looking for a new friend to talk to. I won't make you do this much longer, I promise. For the people who just want to listen. We're having trouble getting some people to start walking again, that's a good sign. So when you're ready, begin to walk and maybe find another person to chat with. Again, preferably someone who you don't know or don't know. Yes. No, I'll do a new question once people have moved on. But say hello to your new friend. Has everyone found a new friend? Okay, awesome. So the next question is, what is something that you're both excited about and maybe nervous about being here? I bet we've carried both of that, especially because I bet most of us haven't gathered in person in a while. Right? What is something maybe we were nervous about? What are we excited about? It might be flip side of the same coin even. So share that with your new pairing. Yeah. If both people haven't had a chance to talk, but it sounds like you're doing that very organically. take another 30 seconds or a minute to wrap up your conversation and eventually say thank you to your new partner and find your way back to your seat. Say goodbye and thank you to your new friend or friends. And begin to make your way back to your seat. Begin to make your way back to your seat. I'm sorry, I'm using my substitute teacher voice. I didn't mean to sound harsh. Just begin to say goodbye. I'm trying to be organic, to be too gentle, I think. And I like people connecting, that's okay.
It's hard to unconnect.
It is. I know, that's a good thing, you're connecting. Like I said, this is important. So I'll take a pause before I get back to the content here. And this is if you want the slide, I'll send you a PDF of the slides if you would like. I will also send you, I have a longer list of these team building activities that I can send you in a PDF, and a sample meeting agenda that includes a lot of the things that I suggest that we include in this foundational work. So you're closest, so I'll put it there first. No pressure, I know none of us needs more emails, so I totally no pressure. If there's something specific that you want in addition to the things that I'm already naming, like put that down there too, and I'll make sure to follow up with you too. And then underneath the sign-up sheet, there's a manila notebook. That has some times I have available to meet. If you wanted a one-on-one talk about anything we've done here, about any of the things that I do in addition to this, feel free to sign up on that yellow sheet. I have times while we're here, still this afternoon and tomorrow morning, and then I have some listed that we could do a Zoom meeting next week. I have some there too, just so you can do that. But I'm sending that around now because if I do it at the end, no one will be able to do it. So I want you to do that. So you could do these kinds of activities in the context of a meeting. Now maybe you don't have the space for a walking exercise like that. I just like getting people moving because it helps lift our energy if you've listened to me talk for a while. But you can do that in the context of a team meeting. Like giving people a question like the questions I gave you, and have them talk in pairs first. That usually helps people who are more introverted, like warm up. If they're in a pair, it's less intimidating to talk to one person than the whole room. And then maybe inviting people to share out of that. Like that's a typical thing that you would do, a tiered thing. And it doesn't have to be about work, although you can wrap it up in work. Like let's say that you can, a question I sometimes suggest for people is like a question about your vision and mission. Like where have you seen someone on the team, or where have you lived out our vision and purpose recently? Tell a story about that. So you can wrap it together with some of the other things if you want to even be more efficient and get a little more bang for your time, right? Getting a little more leverage out of the time that you're spending on the community building. Because I know that when I was first taught how to do this, and it was actually mostly in the context of doing youth ministry, when I was taught how to do these kinds of team building things, and I had a colleague and now a friend and a coach at the time who said, we're going to take this insane amount of time to do this. Like it felt like forever to me. I don't remember how long, but it was like, we're going to do this for 20 minutes or something. I'm like, are you crazy? These teenagers are not going to do this. I thought it was insane. And then I was like, oh, that makes everything go so much better if you invest in the time in that. And with a team, you work on an ongoing basis. You have to do it all the time, right? You have to keep doing it because we can't just assume that relationships will keep growing organically. I think we've learned that by being separated, right? I think we've learned that we have to be very intentional about building team within our teams. So I think that's one of the blessings of being separated is that we've learned we have to be more intentional about connection. Whether we're remote or in person, both. And then I mentioned this earlier, community care. Like really setting up a culture of care for people, and part of that is in knowing what's happening with other people. But here's the thing. The idea of wellness, fitness, this mindfulness, the stuff I teach, has really gotten embedded, I think, in patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism. Like it's been commodified, right? So what I mean by that is, and feel free to come up to a chair. You're not interrupting, don't worry. I'm hard to interrupt, it's okay. So it's been really commodified, this idea of wellness and self-care and all of that. So what I mean by community care is not like having time to take spa days and vacations. I'm not against spa days and vacations, by the way. Go do that. However, I do that too. It's actually creating a community that truly embraces and cares for one another and is interested in what's going on in each other's lives beyond work. So one of the things that I've done recently, I experimented. Starting a new business is one giant experiment. You may know something about that, I bet. Like starting this new thing has been an experiment. One of the things I kept hearing over and over again from people is like, I really want to do self-care, or I'm talking about community care, I want to do this kind of care, but I don't know how to make time for it. So I finally listened and I did this online retreat recently called Become a Time Boss. So I'm going to help you manage your time in a way that you can make time for the things that are important to you. And what was so interesting is that when I guided people through conversations about what are my priorities, like getting clear about my priorities and then living into them, like it's amazingly transformative for people, which I was experimenting. I don't know if this works, but in fact, this one thing that I did actually did work. Many things have not, so I can share those stories too. But this particular thing worked pretty well. So I'm going to invite you into a different or a little bit of a reflection then. So if you have some paper, and there's paper on your seat, feel free to use the opposite side of it if you didn't have a clean piece of paper and a pen or pencil. I'm sorry I forgot to bring extra pens with me. I hope people have something, or you can share among yourselves if you don't have one handy. And let's take a couple of minutes to reflect. I'm doing this for a team, so thinking about your team at your work. If anyone needs paper and pen, like we'll try to get some stuff. Take a moment to reflect. When my team is feeling the most healthy, balanced, and rested, we are prioritizing. What are you prioritizing? And no rush. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to really be in quiet and silence first. 30 seconds to reflect on that. As you wrap up whatever last thought you had about these, about your priorities and what helps your team feel healthy and balanced, finish that last sentence up or whatever you were working on, and then find someone who's just nearby you, again, a pair or 3 people, and share something that came out of that time of reflection. What's 1 or 2 things? Just something that you might share that popped up. If you're comfortable with that, if not, then just don't do it. It's okay.
Well, our team is and I guess what it
Take another minute or so to finish up whatever you're saying in your conversation. Then begin to say thank you to your partner or partners, and return back to the big group. What did you come up with? So is there anything that anyone, I don't have time to hear from everyone, I would seriously love to hear that. What did people come up with in this reflection process? Anything that really struck you? Yeah.
We both shared that our teams feeling healthy, balanced, and rested have not been a reality in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, almost never.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, sharing that shared struggle then around that. Yeah.
One of the things that I was sharing is that I've been with the agency 23 years, but my role changes about every 4. And I'm now with the advancement and outward facing team. And we used to have these staff meetings every other week that were terribly painful for everyone. And when we asked some of those priority questions and why do we meet, what are we doing, we changed what we're doing in that meeting and everybody loves it now. We call it our E-Walk. We have education, wins, obstacles, what's coming up, and connection.
Oh, I love that. And I can't quite say your name, I can correct you.
Samantha.
Samantha, thank you for sharing that. That's so important to know. I think these times have forced us to ask why in a way that we haven't had to before. And that's a good thing. Like knowing why we have a meeting, like if everyone thought it was terrible, why keep doing it? Like, I mean, really? Like, and it was probably terrible before the pandemic, right? Like, it wasn't a new thing, and so now, right, it was terrible before, and then you put it on Zoom and it's still terrible, it's just on Zoom. Like, people blame Zoom for bad meetings, I'm like, no, they're just bad meetings. Like, let's be honest here, it's just, this is giving us a chance to reinvent our meetings. So yay, reinvent your meetings, and you ask the questions like, what are our priorities? Like, what do we want out of this, right? And maybe that's something to ask your team, like, what would help you? Like, what would help them feel that way, or what you might push a little harder and be like, so when you are personally feeling rested and whole, what are you doing? Like I do this as an individual exercise a lot. And so that might be a conversation to have within your team if they're not feeling that way, because they're probably not. None of us are feeling like completely with it right now. I know that I was like totally frazzled trying to get here because I'm like, I don't remember how to pack a suitcase apparently. Like I used to do this all the time. This wasn't a problem for me. I could do it in 20 minutes. Now it's like a 3-day ordeal. Maybe one more reflection that you came up with about your team. Like something you know, yeah. Did you have something? I'm sorry, I thought you were
Are you
raising your
looking
hand.
at me?
No, yes, no, oh, back there, yeah. No, I'm sorry, I thought you were moving. You were just probably shifting, sorry.
I said, when we're prioritizing self-care and boundaries, because I would agree, like, nothing's been the same in these last 2
Yeah.
years. And like I said, we all probably hit, like, revenue went down with
Yeah.
COVID because there were services you couldn't provide. And so once the world started opening back up, it's like, okay, you gotta take this on, and then,
Yeah.
you know, we're caretakers by nature, and you're looking and you're seeing that there's like a 7-month wait list, and you know, you have like 80 clients already. You're like, well, maybe I can take 5 more on, and so your boundaries are out the door because you know everyone
Yeah.
has a need. So we can prioritize having those boundaries and that self-care.
Yeah, so prioritizing healthy boundaries and self-care, even though, like, right? Because you were probably doing too much before things started opening up, and now both the needs that you meet, the needs that the services that you offer can be offered again, but you already have people who are stretched too thin. Like, what do you do with that? And that means you're going to have to again focus on, in that case, organizational priorities. Like, what are the critical needs right now that we have to meet? And you're probably going to have to say no to some other things to have those boundaries. And that is terrible because no one likes saying no because there's need. It's not because there's not a need. It's just that you're human and you can't do everything, right? We're all human beings. We're finite, unfortunately, and our time is finite. So yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. That was incredible. I love hearing those stories, and I bet you had more that I didn't get a chance to hear from that. We're going to move through the rest of these sort of foundational things. We're going to move through a little bit fairly quickly. So again, this building of foundation, you're always building capacity with your team. And maybe one of the things you need to do now in building capacity is really having hard conversations about what supports you. Like, what do you need? What is a healthy balance for you? Like, when do you need to leave by the end of the day in order to like come back the next day feeling like I'm ready to do the thing that I need to do? Like, maybe having that is foundational. And then part of that too is offering each other guidance. And I bet a lot of you are supervisors or have people you supervise or at least have the opportunity to give feedback, right? One of my favorite books about this right now is Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's a book about managing people. I think it's super, and it actually is helpful about having hard conversations. One of the best books I've read about this, honestly, and I recommend it all the time. So what she recommends that when you're sitting down to a hard conversation, and this is sort of a tip, right, and I'm going to get a little bit more into this later, is that you need to start with positive things first. Like, you need to have the breadth of giving people feedback isn't just honing in on whatever the problem or thing that you want to give people a tip or whatever, or conversation about. It's including all of the breadth of, again, treating people like people. Because none of us is like just screwing something up, right? Like, we may be, but we're also probably doing something right. And so lifting up what that person is doing well. Again, this is more for supervisory conversations, but I think it's a helpful way to approach a lot of hard conversations, right? And offering opportunities for people to grow. Here's this issue, I can get you coaching for that, for example. Or, I know this other person who does that really well. Can you work with them for a little while and work on that kind of thing? The same thing with the behaviors when we're talking about those guidelines or behaviors for the team. Like, if someone's not meeting it, you might give them someone who can coach them. Maybe there's someone who has a strength in doing that well, and they can help break down what they're doing for that person who maybe isn't doing it quite so well, right? Offering them resources to help rectify whatever the issue is that you're bringing up. Offer some kind of solution. Or if it's a broader problem, offering some kind of solution. Now in this, one of the things I've recently added, so if my words aren't as fluid, like, forgive me, okay? So naming, in a hard conversation, naming the power dynamics that are in that conversation. Like, take the example I was just giving you. If you're a supervisor having a conversation with someone about their work performance, let's say, naming that, like, I know that I'm the one with the power here because I'm your supervisor. Like, naming that out loud. But you might name the more subtle things too. Like, that can happen even, those power dynamics, right, exist even if we're the supervisor. You might name, like, what if someone has more tenure than the other one? Maybe there's a supervisor and that person has a lot of tenure that you're now supervising, and you have less tenure. You might name that. You might name race and gender dynamics in the conversation. That, like, I know that this is gonna be this way. Like, here's an example of what I've started doing recently with either my new coaching clients who are people of color or collaborators who are people of color. I say, I know that I'm a white person who carries all of that garbage of white supremacy, and I try to do my work, but I mess up all the time. And so I want you to name that for me and tell me if I'm doing something, I'm doing something to further white supremacy or further that dynamic in our relationship, because I don't want that. So tell me, and I promise I will listen and not react defensively. That's what I promise to do. So naming that kind of, and there might be gender, that happens with gender, that happens with age, that happens with tenure on a team, that happens for lots of reasons. But naming that awkward power dynamic. You know, kind of like Mr. Rogers said, whatever is mentionable is manageable. So if you've named it, then people can start to lift it up. I think that's one thing. And I'm no expert on, like, you'd be in a different workshop if you wanted all the really awesome stuff on DEI, and I wish I could go to that workshop too, honestly. I was like, oh, it's against mine, too much. I was disappointed I couldn't go to that because I know they have good stuff. So here's a really good example. I was doing a training for mid-level managers at an organization in fall, and this is a really great story. So, and that deals with these power dynamics. So this person was a new head administrator for a particular community, a particular piece of the organization, right? And he had a long tenure with the organization, but was relatively young. He had worked there since he was like 16 or something, but would now, I mean, I don't actually know how old he is now, but like still pretty young for one of these kind of administrative roles, but had really worked toward wanting to do this. And he even confessed to this in our conversations that he said, you know what, like, I came into this thinking I knew how to fix and do everything, right? And who among us hasn't done that, particularly when we're young, right? We've walked into a room and said, oh, I have the answers and I know how to fix it all. Well, this created a lot of tension in this new team. Not surprising, right? This would create a lot of tension. So he knew that this was building up, and like, you know, that third hand stuff started coming back to him, right? And so what he decided to do was have what he called a trash meeting, which I think this is brilliant. I had never heard of this, but it's brilliant. They had like an organization, like everybody had this big team meeting, and he said, okay, we are just gonna lay out all of our issues on the table, and called it a trash meeting, and said, here, and I should put an asterisk, I asked him permission to share this, by the way. Like, I actually emailed and said, can I share that story, because it's a really good illustration of what I'm trying to say here. But here's one of the things that in Radical Candor that Kim Scott writes in that book, and says that if you're the supervisor, in general, criticism is given to people in private. You don't do that in a public space. However, if you're the supervisor, the one who's in charge of people, criticism can happen publicly because you're modeling it. That doesn't mean everybody needs to criticize everything you do in public, but you should invite some criticism or some things that can be better. And he did that very well without having read the book. But he had this trash meeting. They aired all their dirty laundry, all their trash, and that created a list of things that could get fixed. And he started approaching his work a lot differently, and through these like more of this relational stuff that I'm talking about after that, which changed, like, he goes, I think it honestly probably saved that team from imploding. And it was during COVID and all the stress, you know, I mean, this is when all the stress of all this stuff is happening. On top of like a new administrator in a place that is young but thinks he knows everything, right? And luckily he was the kind of person who could learn from that and move on and humble himself. Not everybody can do that, but he could do that. So thank you for letting me share. Thank you in the ether for letting me share that story. So here's some things about prepping for, that's an idea about, again, of letting that kind of thing happen, you know, despite the dynamics. So here's some things to prep. If you're prepping for one of those, again, we criticize in private, one of those conversations that are going to be hard, right? If you're prepping yourself for that, I really suggest you do a thing called getting on the balcony. Like getting away from the situation for a little bit and maybe not even thinking about it for a while. That might be a walk or a run or a bike ride for you. That might be time in meditation or journaling or some kind of, what is the practice that helps you get perspective on the situation that you're in? So that you could go in with clarity about what the thing is that you need to address. And also with hopefully an open heart and mind to be able to listen a little bit as well to the person that you're having this harder conversation with. And I get this idea of being on the balcony from two books really by Ron Heifetz and Martin Linsky, who are thinkers from Harvard Business School. I'm not sure they teach there anymore, but they wrote a book called Leadership on the Line and Leadership Without Easy Answers, also really good books if you haven't read those yet. They talk about this getting on the balcony. And they talk about then self-care and caring for yourself, and again, I would say caring for the community and creating a community of care is what helps that happen. So you have to be well cared for and grounded and centered in order to go into that conversation. So get on the balcony, get some perspective about the thing that you're dealing with that individual. This can also be for groups too, if you're having trouble with a whole team, like getting perspective. I would just say you need to block time on your calendar if you're like a senior level administrator for this kind of time all the time. Because you just need to get perspective on whatever is happening with your team, your organization, whatever. You just need time on the balcony for that. To think about the big stuff. I heard or read somewhere recently that I think it's Bill Gates of Microsoft used to take like think weeks. Like he would just go away for a week and think. Like, and that was more about brainstorming and thinking about where the organization should go, but like taking that time away. We may not all take a week. I mean, that's a lot. But, and it drove people nuts that he did it, by the way. Like, people did not like this. It drove them crazy, but getting time on there. So then as you approach a hard conversation, and I'm borrowing a lot of this from the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which again, I highly recommend. She has a newer book that I haven't read yet, and I'm losing the title of it, but which I'm really eager to dive into, but I haven't yet. Again, you praise in public, criticize in private, unless you're the supervisor, and then, or you're the administrator or whatever. You need to invite some of that just so you create a culture of candor, is what she says. This culture of candor that we just say, we just are able to give people feedback, right? And if you know the people involved, you know how you can give it and the strength. Like sometimes you can criticize in public if you know you have a strong enough relationship with an individual, right? Or you can say that to an individual more harshly than you would to another person, knowing they're not, because you know them well enough that they're not going to take it really, really personally or the wrong way, right? And that means you have to have relationships, which we've already talked about. You go in being humble that like, you know what, you might be wrong. Or you don't know everything about that situation. You probably don't know everything about that situation, none of us does. That's not a criticism to you, that's just how it is. Come in with an attitude of being helpful, I mentioned that already. What are the resources or solutions that you're offering? For the behavior that's problematic, for the problem institutionally that's happening, bring a solution. Bring a solution. Or offering, if it's an individual, offering training or coaching or mentoring or something like that. You're right, you won't necessarily have all the answers, you just help them. You help them clarify what the challenge is. You state your intention, so you are clear. In that time that you spend on the balcony, you're clear about your intention for that conversation and you tell them what that is. Again, you name the power dynamics. What's the power dynamic in play in the conversation? And show, don't tell. So isn't it really annoying if someone says, you do, like, they just give you some blanket thing that you do wrong? You're like, well, I don't even know what that means. It's so general, you don't know what it means. Like, it's not helpful. Or, this actually manifests in praise a lot, more even so than in negative feedback. My second teacher training, my teachers actually wouldn't let us just say we liked something. You had to say, I liked it, and this is what I liked about it. And it's a really handy practice. Like, I mean, again, I learned it in the context of a teacher training, but like a yoga teacher training, but it was really useful. And the same with, like, hey, I observe that you're really not connecting with the rest of the team because when we're in our team meetings, you stay really quiet and you're off in a particular corner or something like that. You make a really specific, like, I'm noticing this behavior. And then, again, kind of coming back to the humble and helpful. Like, what's that about? Tell me what that's about. How can I help with that? And you may even have some suggestions for what might help. And then and offer help, training, coaching, mentoring with a coworker, all of those sorts of things. So that's not everything about having hard conversations at all, but I hope that you've gotten at least some ideas or some tools from this. And we're about at 12:15, which is our time for lunch, but I am happy to stay here and answer questions. I also want to mention that I am one of the, in the Consultants Network for CHHSM. That means any of my services are 10% off for your organizations. I do coaching, I do training, I do team building, mindfulness classes. So if something that comes up, like in your team, maybe the teams that are struggling right now, and I have a huge heart for this, because I know how much your teams are struggling right now. If these sorts of practices that I teach can help them rest and restore and renew, and I know they can even if they're not familiar with them, by the way, because I know this to be true in the depths of my soul because I've practiced for 18 years. I know that these things are restful and renewing, and I'm happy to do trainings that are more like this, or really offering those things that are resting and renewing in a team building or just a team retreat to get away. So I would love to help with that because I have a huge heart. My heart is open for that and wants to be helpful. So I'm here for questions. I'm going to go over to lunch if you want to have lunch with me. There's also some times on that folder or on the yellow sheet if you want a time with me later today or tomorrow. So, or later next week. So thank you so much for being here. Yay! You're welcome.